And we're live, Brother Moses. I am still on my triggered rant. And so rather than let that energy manifest, I decided that I would give you 10 pro black outcomes. And so, like always, I am going to throw my music up. I got a little bit of a video, so a brief intermission while we let it build up and folks can join. Sounds in the background because I am a father, working class black man. I am glad to be here with you. Glad that you're here with me. Run my music. I'll get ready to share my screen. Yeah. Thank you. Check, and while I'm live, if I can be heard, if my volume is pretty good, can somebody give me at least a one in the chat if the volume can be heard this time around? I heard on my last stream that I tried to run live again, the volume wasn't off. So can one of the brothers please drop a one in the chat if the volume is all right? I am talking, but I don't want to be just talking for my health. Although I heard that's good for you. And we gonna let that beat build. Number 10. We're going to start right here at the black household, the black family, all the way back in time. Something that should be known. Fannie Smith Washington was a 19th century educator and the first wife of Booker T. Washington. Give him some history. Before her premature death in 1884, Fannie Washington aided her husband in the early development of the Tuskegee Institute, born sometime in the year of 1858. Fannie Virginia Norton Smith, sometimes spelled Fanny, Fanny, grew up in what is now Malden, Kanawha County, West Virginia. Her father was Samuel Smith, said to be part of Shawnee, and her mother was Cecilia Smith. Malden being the same town where Booker T. Washington lived from the age of 19 to 16. The pair were likely acquainted from an early age. Them young couples, they started off young, right? I wonder what they was doing in the 1800s. First of all, they got time to be having relationships and shit in the 1850s and shit, 1858. Education. Fanny grew up in a rural area without a lot of opportunity for education, especially for an African-American woman. However, she was able to pursue advanced studies through hard work and determination. As a young woman, Fannie Smith attended the day program at the local school in Marden with around 80 or 90 fellow pupils. Her intelligence, or her intellect, and determination attracted the attention of her teacher at the time, Booker T. Washington. Washington only 2 years Fanny's senior, 2 years time difference, right? I know, damn, 50 to 18. So we're going to let it build up. See, the first thing that we start with is that premise, black couples, the black household. Start way, way back in time. Let that thing build. See, Tuskegee Institute, and we know about Booker T. Washington. But what about Fanny, who grew up in that rural area without a lot of opportunity for education? So what was she doing in them times? Probably working, even at a young age. Especially for an African-American woman. Signal number 2, black marry black. So pro-black, example number 1, number 10 of positive pro-black outcomes would start right there with Booker T. Washington's wife, educated in a space that didn't have a lot of opportunity for education. However, she was determined, gained admission to Hampton Institute. Fanny fell behind in payments and temporarily left Hampton in 1878. For the next 2 years, Fanny taught at a school near Malden, so she had to go home. Same place she used to work and couldn't find many opportunities. She had to go back there as an adult in order to save money for her own education. In addition to daily 3-mile walks to and from the school, Smith was also acting as a primary caregiver for her mother. In January of 1880, she sent her final payment of $48 to JFB Marshall. At that point, she was earning $32.50 a month. Facts. But most of it was used to meet household expenses. Fact. So that's number 2. Number 10. Smith returned to Hampton Institute, and then she graduated from Hampton in 1862. And of course, if I would talk about the man's wife, you know it has to lead to point number 9. 10 pro-black outcomes. Very quick video here, so be sure to like and subscribe. Hit that bell notification if you haven't already. I'm gonna give you these 10. They're gonna get this work. What have blacks done? What have pro-blacks done? Do you even have a definition yet? Do you have a lens to view pro-black? So let's go. Number 9. Talk to him, Mo. More collections like this. I can tell you about this time period, but many would get lost in the Industrial Revolution and stop right there at the top, looking at the collection of Andrew Carnegie's papers from 1803 to 1935. They would want to relate to Andrew Carnegie more than they relate to Booker T. Washington. They wouldn't want to look up his information. They wouldn't want to study that man. You see on the right, there is a collection for Carter Godwin Woodson and his papers. They wouldn't want to study that. They wouldn't want to know what the black man did. What is pro-black? Let me give you 10. This is number 9. Because if I'm going to talk about the man's wife, of course I got to talk about the man. I would say that in that Tuskegee Institute, it meets the criteria of the expectations of the naysayers, those who say there are good blacks and other blacks, and that information is readily available. That is the accomplishment, number 9. Blacks in chemistry at Tuskegee Institute, that same institute founded by whom? Booker T. Washington, and whom? His wife, his black wife. All right, so you know they got married in a church because we have culture. Fanny's mother, Celia, was unenthusiastic about the marriage due to Booker T. Washington's less than impressive financial situation. She was only making $32.50 a month herself as a teacher, and he's only 2 years older than her. So, and they're a young couple. They trying to make it work in the 1880s. Give them that work. His financial situation then, and the fact that the marriage would take her daughter so far from home. Now that's a black man with a plan. Oh, we got to do it moving. He's an author. He's an educator. He's a lecturer. He's a teacher, and he's trying to keep open this institute. He's a letter writer. He is a genius in my position. But an agricultural or agrarian society needed some form of leadership, some form of direction. It had to be written down. It needed a media. So he was a newspaper publisher. And that's the black home. And don't lose the focus. Education is still there. This is about the Tuskegee Institute, and she did help the brother get it running. So let's go from chemistry and STEM and the investments in that, you know, that was right. You know, you got a school, you Tuskegee Institute, you what's his name, Johnson, you Umar Johnson, you got a school. Now you ain't Umar, fuck Umar, I ain't seen that school yet. You my boy Q Butter. Will allow in a debate. photograph shows interior view of the chemistry laboratory classroom with students at Q Butter Zyx Institute. Since we dropping names on pro-black shit. And you got that picture with George Washington Carver standing there. Shut your mouth. They ain't even know, bro. So let's keep it moving because I do want the video to be quick, digestible, and palatable. I do want it to make sense, and I do want it to manifest. And I know that that requires it to be condensed. So we'll keep it pushing. The fact that we have access to that Library of Congress, and even today an African-American man can access that Library of Congress and find information is point number 7. You can be that black researcher that brings to light the education, the manuscripts of that pro-black household. You could be like me. You can do exactly what it is I am doing right now, sharing this media platform to highlight pro-blackness in real time. This is live, unscripted, and unfiltered. Access. They tell us that we have an advantage here. We have the opportunity to exceed and to shine. We have doors opened up that used to be closed to us. One of those is the doors to educate yourself. What is important to you? What books will you read? Maybe it is STEM and places like the Zyx Institute or Tuskegee or even Hampton where the wifey went. Maybe those places are still in your grasp. Now, it's going to require a little bit more than $32.50 a month to attend. And so this here is going to be important for you. I'm going to move to number 6. Number 6 is a bit convoluted, so stay with me. The school budget cuts and their effects. Public school budget cuts translate into higher costs for families. Damn. So if you start cutting schools like public education, cutting curriculum, not spending money on the schools, that's going to make it harder. That's going to be more expensive on my family. And there's studies that go into that. Public school budget cuts are now impacting parents' pocketbooks. Budget cuts have forced public schools to reduce their curriculum offerings, increase class sizes, and cut back on teacher positions. So just that mere act, feel me, had to be something that pro-blacks stepped up and intervened. They had to get some partnerships. They had to get some allies. They had to play that political game. They had to do something. They had to exercise power in those situations because those budget cuts what were they teaching? What were Fannie Smith and Booker T. Washington teaching? I got to make it all relevant. As a young woman, Fannie Smith attended the day program at the local school of Martin with around 80 to 90 fellow pupils. That's your talented 10th argument of those who can actually go to school. Her intellect and determination attracted. So 80 to 90 fellow pupils. You know how many niggas it was? You know how many niggas it was in Virginia? But 80 to 90 pupils, 80 to 90. And you know how many niggas it was? The talented 10th, it wasn't even a 10th. Her intellect and determination attracted the attention of her teacher at the time, Booker T. Washington. Only 2 years Fannie's senior, paid special attention to those students he considered to have promise and often prepared them to enter and attend the Hampton Institute in Hampton, Virginia, known colloquially, I don't even know how to say the word. I need Brother George on here, as Booker Washington's boys. Fannie was the only woman in the group at the time. Soon after gaining admission to the Hampton Institute, Fannie Smith fell behind in payments and temporarily left. You know, she came back, she sent her final payment of $48, cost about $32.50 a month through her teacher's salary, but most of it was being used to meet what? Household expenses. So she knew about a hardship on, man, I need money just to meet my basic household expenses. She was placed on the roll of honor as a student who, leaving the school in debt to it, had paid their debts in full from their earnings as teachers or otherwise. They have that today. debt forgiveness if they become teachers and such. It's an incentive, but oftentimes, is it underused or overused? I don't know. We know the numbers. 80% is still dominated in that space by not the black woman. So I don't know. But Smith did return and she did graduate. The new couple moved to Tuskegee, Alabama, where Washington had accepted the position of principal of a new school for African-American children the year before. So what happened? Cecilia wasn't really a fan of y'all getting married, because now you moving from Virginia to Alabama, and that seemed like it was too far. Why did it seem like it was too far at the time? Because them roads wasn't safe to be traveled at night. This is the 1880s. You ain't got no car, nigga. You on a horse or something. You walking, and you got a long way to go to get back to the safety and convenience of your predominantly black community. It's only 80 to 90 of you Negroes who are in this space for miles. Tell me about your pro-blackness. And he decided that he was going to take his woman, his honor roll student whose debt was forgiven, and they got married and said, we're going to Alabama. I'm going to be principal of a new school for African-American children. And that's what he said he was going to do. And that is what that black couple, that household, got done. The new couple moved to Tuskegee, Alabama, where he took that role. Smith, the Washingtons, rented a large home and soon invited 4 other faculty members of the Tuskegee Institute to board with them. Man, I can only imagine rent parties in the 1880s, what those looked like. Fanny assumed the responsibility of Institute housekeeper. Hold that. She also immediately joined the faculty of fledgling Tuskegee Institute and is credited for broadening the curriculum. What were they teaching? For female students, and developing the school's home economics program. 1880s. Talk to me, man. Talk black to me, man. I got to give them this work, but they got to understand it's a bit convoluted, but it's going to make sense. They are teaching home economics. Pro-black outcomes number 6. Public school budget cuts translate into higher costs for families. Public school budget cuts are now impacting parents' pocketbooks. Budget cuts have forced public schools to reduce their curriculum offerings, increase class sizes, and cut back on what? Teacher positions. Pro-blacks had to step up and say, man, we got to put a stopgap on that. They had to get political. They had to get active. They had to do something about that. Pro-black outcomes number 6, how African-American pro-blacks addressed budget cuts in public education. Now that's something you're going to have to get your own lecture on and look at from that lens. I'm just telling you the information is available. Just like point number 7, we have access to the Library of Congress. You can do the research. Just ask yourself what's important to you. Scroll up, scroll down, and get with it. Especially if you're going to be delivering content. Chemistry laboratory at Tuskegee Institute. I bet they didn't even know they was looking at George Washington Carver, one of their favorite talking points. Oh yeah, it's going to get deep. And wifey, of course, the inner theme of this is the black household, so pro-black outcomes. But I got to keep it moving, let it resonate for a second. Hopefully I'm not talking too fast and that it's going to be something that they can keep up with if they decide to listen. Point number 5, National Center for Education Statistics. Give them that work because they like stats, they like data. And what we're talking about here is education. In 1929 to 30, there were approximately 248,000 public schools compared with about 98,000 in 2015 and 16. Oh, my goodness. 248,000 in the early 1920s, 98,000 in 2015 to 16. You tell me we don't got something that we need to be focused on, bruh. However, the number of public schools has increased in the recent decades between that millennial place that, born in the 80s or whatnot. These younger niggas than me. I'm like the oldest millennial. I was born in 82. Nonetheless, between 1988 to 89, it took a while just to put the stopgap on. And we're going to get to why that's important. So rock with the kid. In 2006 to 07, there was an increase of approximately 15,000 schools. Since 2006 to 7, the number of public schools has remained relatively stable. Stabilize this thing, put the stopgap in. They are closing down public schools, and that education has been our caveat. That is our pipeline to even looking at what they call a talented 10th, which isn't by the numbers. It's just 80 to 90 folks, man, in the 1880s. While the total number of public schools in the country has remained relatively stable in recent years, new schools have opened and some schools have closed. In 2015 to 16, there were 1,160 school closures. You can divide it by 50, or you can actually get right down in on where the states are and then where the cities are. And I've shown you before, I do have the skill set to show you that map. I won't do it every time, but I'll let that sink in. Schools that closed had enrolled about 195,000 students in the prior school year. Of the schools that closed, 893 were regular schools, 32 special education, 14 were vocational schools. Why is that important? Because I'm talking about Booker T. Washington, and as we know, his patented debate focused on vocational education. And of the schools that offered that vocational school, they were the ones that remained open. Shout out about that pro-Black outcome. Of these closed schools, 280 were classified as charter schools. The number of schools that closed in 15 to 16 was lower than the number in 2001. However, the number of annual school closures fluctuated during that period, ranging from about 1,000 to 2,000. School closures do not necessarily reflect the number of school buildings that have been closed, since a school may share a building with another school, or one school may have multiple buildings. And from there, for me to say, and how many Black people in general were impacted by school closures, would be some more information. You can keep it high level, keep it on education, and you can look down here where it says vocational by school type and see that these are the lower numbers. So as an ideology in the Booker T. Washington perspective, or the pro-Black perspective, they were at a time where land was important and agricultural use was important. And his wife was the one who said, and we also need a curriculum for home economics. Stick with the kid. Number 4. This is courtesy of whom? The Crisis magazine. Pro-Black know what that means, because I can give you the information from even that time period that is still connected to today, because we share history. That is our oral tradition, our culture. Shout out that and let it resonate. Pro-Black outcomes. When the U.S. Supreme Court's 1954 Brown versus Board of Education, I could stop and shout right there, but I would keep it going. When they made their public school desegregation the law of the land, many whites resisted, perhaps none so vehemently as those in Prince Edward County, Virginia. I'm gonna let that shit sink in, because they might miss how intercorrelated this lecture actually is. And so I gotta let it resonate. I gotta let it resonate. Number 10, Fanny, Virginia Norton, who grew up in West Virginia. And the black man she married, Booker T. Washington, and their institute, and that HBCU, and the starting of use or the leveraging of those 1862 land grants, and saying we're going to start a college. And why is that history important today? And the Hamptons and the Howards and AME education in general now, if we want to get diverse, but the curriculums that were offered and the home economics and the progress. So curriculum, STEM, which was our number 9. Category Library of Congress, the access to research. Number 8. Number 7, let's see, 10, 9, 8. So this is 7, the public school budget cuts, having to fight back against that. Geez, giving you the data. Vocational schools being one that was protected, which is directly correlated with Booker T. Washington's perspective. National Center of Education statistics. Am I giving you facts or am I giving you my own opinion? I'll sprinkle my perspective in, but here you go. You got the numbers. You got the information. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Crisis Magazine. Scarecrow. If you've seen The Wizard of Oz or The Wiz. W.E.B. Du Bois, The Crisis Magazine. Tin Man, Booker T. Washington. Mary Bethune-Cookman is Dorothy. Keep it rocking. When the United States Supreme Court's 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision makes public school desegregation a law of the land, there was some resistance, perhaps none so vehemently as those in Prince Edward County, Virginia. So Virginia is still struggling after all of those years. That thing that made her Mama Cecilia, afraid for her daughter's life and a little bit distrusting of the black man whom she was going to marry, despite the fact that that man said, I am going to be a principal in a school in Alabama. It is a great distance to travel, and there was a fear, and that fear was real because even into the 1950s, there was strong resistance where blacks lived. Perhaps none so vehemently as those in Prince Edward County, Virginia, which closed its public schools rather than allow black and white children to sit together in the same classroom. That tells you two things: that black children up until then were still not sitting there. They were still in those black classrooms. There was still a an opportunity for education. What about Fanny draws me to make her number 10? The fact that despite it not being much opportunity for her to get an education, period, she excelled, despite being the only woman in that classroom where black schools had accreditation and funding due to the hard work and efforts and politicking and all of that of black men. Those black institutions, Booker T. Washington, despite all of that information, these schools are there and they're trying to get there. But all the way up into the 50s, there was still strong resistance, vehement. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but you know what I mean. Between 59 and 64, black children were either forced to go outside the county, get out of the county, or get out of the state for an education. And so, I could show you the numbers in the early 20s, 248,000 schools. But by the millennial era, when I was born, they had damn near shut them down and said, we will not be funding this pathway to the middle class for black people. And even an integrationalist political agenda pushed in the 60s by a Morehouse HBCU, keep it relevant, a competitor even for black talented 10th, if you want to call it so, but actually a competitor to the PWI for blacks in general, if you want the facts, a competitor. So Virginia didn't take it so well. Shout out the fight that we had and we won and we pushed through, because we're only giving you the facts. That is a pro-black outcome. I can't deny it. It is a pro-black outcome. Up against, they will shut down every school, and you will have to either get out of their county or get out of their state. That same space is where Fannie Smith excelled. She married Booker T. Washington. They were able to do it despite the odds, be principles and own. I can preach right there, but I'd rather just give you the facts. And I'd rather say, let's move forward. Because there is other examples we could use. We don't got to just say, well, that's what they were doing there. We can look not so far up the road to the Board of Education in PG County. And what I would be looking for there, if you are the highest representation of Black wealth and achievement in America, what does your Board of Education look like? Is your power moving from your economic status, your bigger homes like Booker wanted to buy? A home big enough to house other workers, board members even. And who would be the chair of that board? Is that a Black man? And before anyone else can try to tell me that we don't have that type of transitionary into power, into the power spaces, into the industries, and they would have to prove me wrong. But maybe we're not doing enough I'm not doing enough. I'll own it. Maybe I'm not doing enough of this type of content to prove pro-Black excellence, to keep it pro-Black. So I'm gonna give you 10, and then I'm gonna go back to having the conversations that I like, which is, you know, the drama sells. I like to be in those spaces where we're building it up. Although this form of excellence is done. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, number 2. I could go on and on about PG County and you know that entrepreneurial base, Black wealth, or whatever it is, and somebody else might want to argue against Blackness even there and say some other things. But I'm saying look at insurmountable odds, because there are spaces like Black spaces right outside of Atlanta, for example, Gwinnett County, where you can cater or have that many Black families, but your leadership is a lot more diverse, and you don't have a chair that is Black representing the interests of that Black population. All you have is maybe one in the representation, not even the representation by those same numbers. So even on the board, and it took you a while to get there, Black woman, but even when you made it to that board, your voice was a competing voice for those seeking resources, those also looking to protect their schools, those looking to provide education for their constituents, their families, their communities. You were competition, you were a competing voice, and even though you made it there, they still won't give you your credit, Black woman. That's why Fannie was number 10. And then we had number 9 book. And then we had the Library of Congress of Education of being accessible and available. School budget cuts and their impact. Where did we fight? In line with the Bookerites, you will see that we needed to protect at least vocational training and education. Home economics was primary and foremost, because talented 10th arguments do not represent the mass of Black folks who are still systemically, institutionally, and economically locked out of wealth. But they won't make it about race. They'll say it's about culture. They won't make it about class, and they definitely won't make it about the numbers. 248,000. And we're talking about that period where even when we had the most significant, highest level Supreme Court decision to rule in our favor, the people 248,000 98,000 public schools was knocked down to about 98,000. And that's not just Virginia, but in places like Virginia, they were the most vehement. And we can give you the information about how violent it got on other episodes, but this one is just about the value of education. I tell you as B1 Brother Moses that the talking point I use is legitimate, and I don't have time to explain all of this during a debate. I will hope that they understand how we have fought as pro-blacks to have education become a viable pathway into the middle class for black households. And I just hope you understand. And then I'll show you the information about that Supreme Court justice case. I can read it word for word. Or I can hope you understand and get it and say, nigga, move forward. I don't have to nigga explain. And then I can show you the Board of Education chair, Dr. Alvin Thornton, and say, when we're up against that, we need pro-black representation. This is PG County right up the road, and it represents a high concentration of black wealth or achievement. There's other things that we can bring in to show our pro-black outcomes. Should we have to? I don't know. Spaces like Gwinnett are up against it. There is just one black woman representing Gwinnett County Board. Now, these are commissioners. And so I'll say we are up against it. I lived in Charlotte for a little bit. Wanted to make it relevant to myself. I won't use a personal anecdote about where I lived and my situation, where my kids were educated in Charlotte, but I will say I am bringing information that I know, and that's why I researched it, and that's why I brought it up. Because you do have places like this as well as a counter narrative. Closed schools, severe weather message, February 6, 2020. Schools are still closing. Sometimes they're closing due to severe weather. Sometimes they're closing due to budget cuts. Sometimes they're closing because they are in predominantly black spaces. We're up against it because you can look at their website and they have black women fighting back, removing barriers. And I call those victories or outcomes or positive pro-black outcomes. Look at that. Oh, you want to see what pro-black looks like in real life? What is the pro-black lifestyle? It's this type of fight of even having your story published on that commission or that board, even having representation on those boards, school boards, education boards, or county commissioners, going up against the odds of vehement white resistance, getting a Supreme Court justice, the highest ruling that you could get to rule in your favor, but still having that white backlash as a reality, being raised in that space and having a mother who would discourage the bond or the union between you and someone 2 years your senior, what you would consider a good black man who has an offer letter to be a principal, but because the roads are so dangerous for you to travel, the mother hates on that black man and says, baby girl, I'm just trying to protect you. And that is just too far away from home. And would emphasize safety and convenience inside the black community, even though the woman was making a mere $32.50 per month. And I can give you all of these facts. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. With only the hope that it resonates and that it's of value to you enough to hit that like button and share it. It may not have even been for you this time around. Maybe you knew all the information that I provided and the information just was confirmation bias. You already knew what it meant to be pro-black. You didn't need for me to Negro explain it at all. These 10 I could have went without saying. I didn't have to connect it. Education, one line of thought, just education. I didn't have to continue the debate for the fantastically challenged on history. I didn't have to do that. I didn't even have to say it that way. But if education is the debate, then let me educate you through media. And the sources that I used, let's see if they're credible. Let's run it back to make sure the sources are getting their credit. So we know Wikipedia is that space for educational information. It's always a good source to start with. I say that time and time again, believe it or not, it absolutely is. You can get information on or links to Tuskegee Institute. You can get Find a Grave memorial websites. You can learn about her Indian ancestry or Cecilia's ancestry. Chicago was great at preserving it. The University of the Illinois Press was great at preserving it. You can get links to even them, and you can get yourself a subscription-based membership to the Chicago University of the Illinois Press as you continue to become a researcher. And I would tell you this again, this George Washington Carver, great inventors, you cannot discredit that. That is pro-Black outcome. I showed you the picture, but this time told you the significance. It wouldn't have made it in a 3-minute debate or a 5-minute rebuttal round. It would be something that I would hope they know, the opposing arguments. I would tell you that access to that information can even go to the higher levels if they like politics. I do say politics every once in a while. So the Library of Congress is a great repository. They also have a subscription-based model. What is your sources, Brother Moses? I'm glad you asked. I got to drop them to make sure the credit is due so they don't ban my stream. How budget cuts impacted public education. Didn't even have to go into it, but publicschoolreview.com was the one who published that information. I moved straight forward and went to the fast facts on closed schools. That is a hell of a source. It is one hell of a source. So I actually clicked on that one and went in as my next point. Keep it concise. It's about education, and it is for the fantastically challenged. National Center for Educational Statistics. What are we up against? Despite odds is always my argument. And the data says there were 248,000 public schools. And that was in that 1929 period where they determined child labor laws. What do we do with these kids? They said they have to go to school, took them out of the workforce, and crippled the home economics of the Black family. However, the number of public schools has increased between the 88. I told you we are millennials, and around that time is the benchmark for what? Progress, because we finally put that plug in and said protect education. The board, the Supreme Court justice couldn't protect us, but before I got there, I needed to drive that point home and give you the source, courtesy of the Crisis magazine. Why is that important? Because Brother Moses doesn't just deliver off tongue-in-cheek content. Brother Taz pushed me and challenged me when he said The Wizard of Oz and its social political ramifications. And on the fly, I continued that debate or that conversation with legitimate pushback and said, well, let's do it. Let's break down The Wiz. And let's give real characters of that time period, and let's use it from a strategic lens, which is education and our fight for education. And I give you a real talking point as a pathway to the middle class for the Black household. That just goes over people's heads, but that is for a higher thinking man. I am on a higher level with energy right now. It has been almost 45 minutes. I gave you 10. I could go on and on, but I'm so long-winded, I would need additional streams to win a debate. Showed you where her mother had that issue at, and showed you that that same issue resonated all the way from when she earned her degree despite the odds. And then into the 50s, which is 75 years later. Why was it important for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to fight? Because it was still that same struggle for education for Black people. And it was still the resistance that would rather shut down every school than to allow funding. And those decisions were made on commission levels, Board of Educations and commissioners. So I gave data on that as well. Not just anywhere, but in the areas where they were alive and living, and all the way up to today, where I gave you our upper echelon PG County Black Negro, the talented 10th of the talented 10th, and said, do they have a Black man that's on their board? And the answer was yes. And then I moved it into other spaces where there are predominantly Black folks and said, well, what are their challenges? And diversity and inclusion was its biggest obstacle. And that black woman is the one who's there now, but she is not the chair. And those spaces are diverse, and they have diverse talent representing the interests of their constituents, competing for funding against the interests of our constituents. And so I give you social and economic and political factors. But even when I do so from a lens that shows you the power of pro-black culture. And 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. That's all I got. B1 Brother Moses. And I'm out.